Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening. I'd like to begin by thanking our sponsors, Bright House Networks, Bay News 9, the Florida Business Network for Clean Energy Economy, the Florida Restaurant and Lodging Association, TradeWinds Island Resorts, and the St. Petersburg Times. First, some logistics. We have a very full program this evening. There are no scheduled breaks during the evening except for a stand-up and stretch between the two panels. So if needed, as you depart the digitorium, the women's restrooms are down the hallway to the right. The gentlemen's restrooms are down the hallway to the left. In addition to this live audience, we have participants watching this event live over the internet. Those watching online can send questions to us at that address, seminole_info@stpetecollege.edu. Those in the room will have cards in your programs, and you can take those cards, fill out those cards at any time, and during the transition, when the first panel ends, we will have you pass those cards to the aisle. We'll collect them. I will then collect them and give them to our moderator, who will be asking questions of the panel. We have some extraordinary speakers with us this evening, as well as numerous elected officials and dignitaries. In the interest of time, we will not be making formal introductions, but we'll ask SPC's latest VIP, our new president, Dr. Bill Law, to welcome us and set the stage for this event. Dr. Law.
Thank you all. We still have folks coming in, but we will get started. I am Bill Law, and I'm the newly appointed president at St. Petersburg College, and what a great opportunity for me to welcome you to our facility. When we can open our doors and be part of the community and have citizens like yourself come and participate with us, we think we're doing a spectacular job. Let me first of all thank Dr. Jim Oliver, who is the provost here at our Seminole campus, who does a spectacular job weaving us into the community and was one of the major forces behind this event. I want to take 1 second. One of the opportunities that is in front of us is the creation of a long-term center that would focus on public policy, solutions, strategic issues. We had started the dialogue about what could that look like when, of course, we were confronted with the oil situation, the oil crisis that has befallen us. We decided that before we could even get the Institute organized, it was more important to present you with information and to engage you as the public and make sure we start doing the work that we hope will get done. So watch us as we unfold our Center or Institute for Strategic Policy Solutions, or whatever we choose to name it. But I want you to be aware that this is the first of a 3-event seminar series. We've already picked Wednesday, August 18th, as the next in the series of 3, and then Saturday morning, October 2nd, for the 3rd in the series of 3. And as by the time we get to October 2nd, we should be able to share with you more information about the long-term vision for our Strategic Policy Institute. Let me take 1 more second, if you would, to thank 2 other folks who have done spectacular work using their very well-placed Rolodex to make calls and to invite people. First of all, Senator Dennis Jones is here tonight, a member of our staff, but somebody who has worked for you and with you over a long, long period of time, and State Representative Janet Long, who was really one of the energy centers behind putting all of this together. So do give them a round of applause if you would. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to St. Pete College.
Thank you, Dr. Law. Now, if we could have the members of the first panel, D.T. Minich from Visit St. Petersburg Clearwater, Keith Overton from the TradeWinds Island Resorts, and Laurie Macdonald from Defenders of Wildlife, along with the moderator for that panel, Dan Berard, to please join us on the stage. We'll begin the program with comments from D.T. Minich. Mr. Minich.
We are in an emergency mode marketing. We are undertaking a lot of public relations. We're dealing a lot with the media, and we had put in a request in the summertime. Our biggest market for Pinellas County for tourism is in-state, actually, for people from Orlando and even people from the Bay Area that rent a room out on the beach for a weekend and things. So we had a $1 million campaign for the summer, and we requested for the governor's office to provide us with some funds that were given to the state. The BP awarded $25 million to the state of Florida for marketing for tourism, and we requested $2.5 million. We were fortunate enough to receive $1,150,000 from that fund. We just received it about a week ago. So we are in the midst of pulling a campaign together for the remainder of the summer and into the fall. We're fairly optimistic. We've been able to replace some of the lost business from the Midwest and the Northeast with additional Floridians, because Floridians understand the geography of the state, and they know that there's a very, very small portion of the beaches and the panhandle that have been affected by this. The other thing that we're trying to stress is that was a really positive PR thing that happened this week when they brought those pelicans down from Louisiana and released them here, because the scientists said, there's probably a 1% chance that Pinellas County would see the effects of the oil on the beach, and that's why they brought the pelicans here. They wouldn't release them somewhere where they would have to go through this again. And so we're using that as part of our public relations, part of our ad campaign. We are also going to be advertising starting this Sunday in the St. Pete Times and the Tampa Tribune to local residents saying, have a staycation, help your local economy, and the featured celebrity of that first ad is a pelican with crystal blue waters behind him. So that's part of the campaign. As I said, so far we have seen a lot of cancellations. We've seen a lot of people from the Northeast and Midwest that are calling and saying, not right now, we're not comfortable coming down. And one of our biggest challenges, the hotels have done a great job of saying we're dropping our cancellation policy. So, we're going to drop, if oil hits our beaches and you've got a deposit on a condominium for a week stay this fall, we'll give you your refund back. But the problem is that families from Chicago, say, are wanting to book a fall vacation, and they're saying, that's great, okay, we'll get our deposit back if oil hits your beach, but I've got to turn around after I hang up with you and book 5 airline tickets from Chicago, and those are non-refundable. So we're really pushing the airlines to try to come up with a solution to say, if an area in Florida is affected, we'll drop the non-refundable clause on the ticket, but that hasn't happened yet. So we're very, very concerned going into the fall and winter, because right now we're able to communicate to our customers, Floridians, that everything's good, and Floridians know that for the most part. But when we've talked to Midwesterners and Northeasterners, they are not as convinced, and they're not as sure about things. We have had an international volleyball tournament cancel. It was scheduled for October. They were coming from as far away as Australia, and the promoter said, they've got to be making their plans now to travel that far, and we can't risk all these teams making all these plans and then something happen with the oil. We have had cancellations on meetings and conventions, even into next year, where meeting planners have said, no, we're not going to risk it. So there are long-term effects. We are going to be asking for additional marketing funds from BP, because we're going to desperately need those in the fall and the winter when we're really going to have our hands full. The European business is affected. I had a trip planned already to Europe 2 weeks ago, and went ahead and met with all of our major tour operators and the media. And I even had some media say, well, we were under the impression that you were not allowed to swim in the Gulf of Mexico, period. This is the truth. So there's a lot of misconception out there. We are very concerned about the winter months. We are already seeing, struggling restaurants and other businesses Also, there's a whole other side of this in terms of tourism with the seafood industry, and people are questioning whether they should eat the seafood in our local restaurants and things like that. So we're trying to get the word out through the hotels and the concierge that, you know, our seafood is safe. It's great to go to a seafood restaurant. We're also doing a lot on the website on education, and that's where we're pushing people. We have a lot of live webcams. We have a whole section now dedicated to oil, and we've just done an agreement with actually St. Pete College professor. I believe his name is Haywood Matthews.
You got it right.
Haywood Matthews. He's a great guy. He's a great spokesman for us, and he is a scuba diver. And so every week we're going to feature, the footage is absolutely incredible. He went the first week, this week, 3 miles off Clearwater Beach to one of the artificial reefs, and the fish and the water clarity, and it's just incredible to see this. And he's going to be our Jacques Cousteau. And this will show, and he talks about, you know, this certain fish cannot live in any kind of polluted water. So we're going to use those kinds of things, those kind of tactics. Just so you know, when I'm throwing out these numbers like $1 million ad campaign, we are a local government, we're a county government agency. However, none of your tax dollars go towards funding any of our operation. We are funded 100% by what's called the bed tax, which is a tax that's placed on hotel accommodations when you come into Pinellas County and stay for short term. So that's how we fund marketing of the county. No general fund taxes or anything go towards that, and it looks like my time is up, so.
Thank you, DT. We have a second expert speaker, Keith Overton, who is Executive Director of the TradeWinds Island Resorts. He also has another perspective as Chairman of the Florida Restaurant and Lodging Association. Keith, would you like to tell us?
Sure. Would you like me to come up? You originally
Come
told
right
us.
up.
You originally told us you wanted us up there.
I forgot.
And DT
Sorry.
didn't follow instructions. That's what happens when you get the government involved. I'm the guy who pays the taxes he's talking about, by the way. But he's a good friend, and we can joke around like that in these times, and that's nice. I am Keith Overton. I'm the chairman of the board for the Florida Restaurant and Lodging Association. And believe it or not, that's not my paid job. My paid job is to make TradeWinds profitable, although this year, if you're here from TradeWinds, you probably haven't seen me very much because I've been on the road talking to people about the oil spill. I've become an expert on oil and really didn't want to. But I will tell you this, the perspective that I've gained has been very helpful, and it's been an honor to represent our industry in this way. I'm going to share with you today some statistics that I think will help you. I also serve on the Visit Florida Board of Directors, which is our state advertising agency, and I'll give you some statistics from there as well. So I'll give you a fairly well-rounded approach about Florida's tourism today, and then we'll take some questions about that. But first, just think about Florida in conceptually for a second. It's been the vacation capital of the country for generations. And when you would think of Florida as a visitor, you would think of things like warm sunshine, blue waters, fresh seafood, white sugary sand beaches, all of those things that Florida has built its reputation on. And today, it seems like everything we've worked for the past century is all for nothing, because you cannot imagine that people in the Northeast, the Midwest, even internationally today, think Florida has changed overnight. And the reality is that it hasn't changed much at all, but the perceptions out there are such that it has. For many people, they would look back at family photos about Florida. You would think about that, or maybe pictures with your parents or your grandparents when you visited. You might have been prompted to come here for a family vacation. Most people come here twice a year if they come here at all. And so it's really devastating to us to see people change their perspective about Florida, particularly our destination, because it's so far away from what's really going on out in the Gulf. But this spill, or this crisis, is like really no other that we faced. If you think about it, when we had hurricanes, tornadoes, wildfires, red tide, you knew they were coming for the most part. You could estimate how long it was going to take to get through it, and then there was a fairly easily projected recovery time period. This is completely different. We have no idea when they're going to get the spill stopped. We have no idea economically how far this is going to go and how many claims are actually going to get paid over the long term. We have no idea environmentally what the impacts are going to be, and it may take years for us to even have those answers, much less know the length in which it's going to take for a full recovery on both perspectives. So it's very challenging in that way. Some statistics for you that I want you to know about Florida. We host over 80 million visitors a year. That's what we did in 2009. That's a huge number. It's the largest by far in the United States. We captured nearly 17 million vacations by Floridians, so as DT mentioned earlier, lots of in-state travel. Collectively, our visitors spent over $60 billion on tourism in Florida last year. We generate nearly $4 billion in sales tax collections, and that's not bed tax collections, that's sales tax collections. And that means a fifth of Florida's sales tax dollars are paid for by our visitors. And Senator Jones and Representative Long will tell you one of the big reasons why we do not have a state income tax today is because tourism provides us the opportunity to not have that. It's a significant industry. It also means jobs. Nearly 1 million people are employed in travel and tourism in the state of Florida, 1 million people. Tourism is our way of life. Summer is very important to us. Roughly a quarter of Florida's domestic visitors come in the months of June, July, and August. Now, you would think, well, that kind of makes sense because there's 4 quarters, but we make most of our money in the fall. So January through about April is when most of our money is made. So it's pretty significant that 25% of it comes in the summer months. It's a huge number. To give you an example of some of the effects that are happening here in Florida, I'm going to quote our numbers. I've been sharing these as I travel the country, talking to legislators and other entities about, what are the real effects. And I'm just going to give you a perspective, and we can apply the numbers fairly easily from there. We're 800 rooms. We're the largest resort on the west coast of Florida. There's 35,000 rooms. I don't know if that's changed quite a bit, about that roughly, in the county. So just take this as an example. BP's asking us to go back and look at the last 3 years from April 20th through whenever you file your claim. And they want to take an average of the revenues that you had for that time period. And then they're going to look at what you're actually producing in revenue for this time period. And if there's a deficit, that becomes your claim. And they ask us again, submit some more numbers, and then they want to look at our percentage of profit. So they take the profit, they apply it to that deficit. Our deficit is $1.7 million just in those 2.5 months. Now, that's about $2,000 a guest room. You can do the math from there. You apply that to the 35,000 rooms, assuming the impact is fairly similar throughout our county. And we already have a $70 million deficit in less than 3 months just in hotel room revenue. Now, that doesn't include anybody who's in the restaurant business. I see my friend Mary here who has other businesses like a surf shop. Your business depends on hotel rooms being occupied, and if those revenues are down, it's a trickle-down effect. Now, take that and apply that to the 76,000 rooms which exist in the Panhandle. And they're suffering more than we are today because everybody thinks the Panhandle's not even there anymore, much less having oil on its beach. So you apply the numbers there, and it's pretty easy to see that Florida has sustained billions of dollars of losses already, and we, again, don't know when the end is going to come. So, it's our duty here to sort of say we need to keep BP in business because they're going to have to pay some claims for a long time. As mad as we are at them, let's don't go boycott their gas stations because we need them to survive. They got a lot of damages to pay for, and they're going to continue to pay for them if I have anything to do with it, as long as we have a claim at stake, because I'm going to stand there and tell them over and over, you have to pay this claim. Kenneth Feinberg has been all over the TV talking about some claims aren't compensable. We clarified that with him on Monday. He said, if oil isn't on your beach, it's not a compensable claim. And we talked to him and said, how can that be? I mean, there's hardly any oil on any Florida's beaches, yet all the businesses are suffering. And he clarified that. And what he really meant to say is if you have a restaurant in Michigan and the price of oysters has gone up, that's not really a legitimate claim. And we're okay with that. But that's much different than the first statement that was made. And what's most concerning when you take that statistic is that it's occurred without a single drop of oil being on our beaches. I had the pleasure of flying over the oil spill with the Coast Guard last week, and we went up in a C-130 plane, and those are pretty fast planes. It took us an hour and 45 minutes just to get to the oil. I mean, to give you a sense of how safe we are here in the Tampa Bay area, I mean, that's a long ways off to reach the oil. Yet, if you look at the national media and reports that are out there, our beaches are tarp, and that's what we're faced with. It's interesting, with Visit Florida, the Y Partnership is managed by Peter Yeswich, who's a nationally renowned marketing expert. And they did a survey, and one of the questions in the survey that they asked, this was done on June 18th, by the way, so the data is fairly old now, but it was right on the heels of when everything was happening. And one of the questions was, which state do you think will be most be affected by oil? And 95% of the people said Florida. I mean, it's amazing to me. Florida is absolutely the least affected state, yet people think it's covered in oil. And I know that survey, when they do it again this week, is going to show that 100% of the people think it's going to be affected by it, probably. The perception is going to continually get worse. You know, prior to speaking on a Neil Cavuto show a couple weeks ago, I was in the studio and I was watching the monitors, and President Obama was on Pensacola's beach at the time. I think it was his second visit, if I'm not mistaken. And on the ticker tape below, it said, "Oil reaches Florida's beaches," plural. And in the background, oil superimposed down the screen by the editor was the transition into the next shot. And I'm sitting here thinking, how are we ever going to combat that? It's crazy. I mean, the national media has it painted, and they want it to be painted that way, that Florida is covered under oil. It's absolutely irresponsible. It's amazing to me that they get away with that. But that's what we're faced with. It's the subliminal misdirection and misdepiction. Lastly, I'm going to close. I've talked too long already, but I've appeared before a number of committees. Monday, I spoke before the BP Oil Commission in New Orleans, and I asked them 5 things, and I want to share those with you today. One, I wanted them to hold I wanted them to hold the media accountable for accurate and fair reporting. They have an ethical and a fiduciary responsibility to do that, and nobody's monitoring it. I want them to put a state agency in charge of that. I want them to look at the media every single week, and if that's going on, sensationalism in the media where it's not factual, fine them, sanction them. Let's correct that problem. It's killing our economy, and they're allowing it to happen right before our eyes. Secondly, thank you. And by the way, I have nothing to lose. I'm just a dumb hotelier. I can say stupid things and challenge people to these kind of things and have no problem doing it, which is the benefit of being in my position, where what I have at stake is our livelihoods and the 800 employees' livelihoods that work for us. And it's nothing more, nothing less. I love our destination, and we want to fight for it. I also ask that once the leak is stopped, there could be years of cleanup efforts. And here's what I think is going to happen. I think BP is going to get into an argument with us here eventually about, is the claim valid? Is it not, valid? And we're going to argue around about it. But here's what's going to happen. I would ask them to just settle in on the fact that make us whole and give us the benefit of the doubt here in the early stages of the game. Okay? Because I'm going to tell you what's going to happen. They're going to get the oil spill stopped eventually. And ultimately, the claims are going to stop. But the damage is going to continue on. And we know this from the storms that happened in 2004. We absolutely know that we still can't fill our hotels in August and September because of the fear that hurricanes are going to come. And we haven't had one since. So we know that's going to be the case. I also asked the committee to not allow the federally appointed oil spill czar to make cavalier statements like that on national TV to give BP a reason to hide behind. Today they're not saying they don't want to pay the claims. They're talking to us in a proactive way about paying them. Why would we give them an opportunity to not make that judgment or that payment? But the federal government, again, gets involved, and that's what happens. I also made the committee aware on DT's behalf that our advertising and marketing efforts at the local level come from bed tax dollars. Well, it's no secret that if our revenues fall, the bed tax collections fall proportionally, and those advertising dollars put us at risk. And so we need to be made whole on those, and I don't want our county agencies to be forgotten in this entire process, and I ask that they ensure that they wouldn't be. And fourth, there's many environmental groups here tonight. I've seen a number of my friends. And I also asked to be sure we take care of the fishing, seafood, and wildlife industries of Florida. They're very important to tourism. They're very symbiotic. We cannot operate as a tourist-based business in Florida without those entities being whole, without them being perfectly intact the way everybody envisioned them from being. And I gave them a really thorough report from the Ocean Conservancy, and I asked them to take those measures into consideration, things such as let's get baseline water table measures and so on, and invest some money into the Gulf of Mexico. It's funny, I was speaking with a lady here earlier, and we had dinner with Byron, what was his last name? Griffiths, and he was with the DEP, and he made this statement. I don't remember the statistics. You might remember them more than me, but there's 3 bodies of water that provide commerce to the United States. There's the Great Lakes, the Chesapeake Bay, and the Gulf of Mexico. The numbers are staggering when you look at the amount of money invested into the well-being of those bodies of waters. I think it's like $600 million a year for the Great Lakes, $400 million for the Chesapeake Bay, and $25 million for the Gulf of Mexico. I mean, no wonder we have problems. I mean, just look at the imbalance, and yet the Gulf of Mexico produces 40% of the commerce. So we're out of balance completely with regard to priorities with the Gulf of Mexico. And then lastly, I pleaded, of course, that we need to continue to advertise. As long as the sensationalism of the media is there today, and I suspect it's going to be there for the duration of this, until some politician does something stupid and draws the attention away from us, which we can only hope that happens. None of ours would do that, of course, in Florida, but the ones in Washington are renowned for that. And we're going to need money to do that. So, $25 million is a great start, but we're going to need another 25 and another 25, and we're going to have to keep investing in that process to counter that. So, again, I'm honored to represent our industry. I'm happy to speak to you here tonight. I appreciate you taking time out of your evening to come hear about how this is affecting us, and it shows that you care, and you care about our state and our destination, and that's a very comforting feeling. Thank you.
Thank you, Keith. We'll have an opportunity a little bit to answer your questions in the economic development field that DT and Keith both presented. But now we're going to change course a little bit, and we're going to hear about another impact that we're concerned about, and that's our wildlife. We have with us today Laurie Ann Mcdonald, who is the Florida Program Director of the Defenders of Wildlife. Laurie?
We are fortunate that the oils have not reached Tampa Bay, and we're looking well. We have beautiful beaches that are clean and are healthy, but the impact on the wildlife of the Gulf, the marine resources, habitat, and wildlife, the impacts truly are global. Perhaps the most compelling images that convey the impact of the oil spill and this oil crisis are those of the loss of life or struggling wildlife covered in oil. And we want to also recognize when we talk about the loss of life, of course, of the human life that has been lost in this disaster. The wildlife that are affected, these struggling or difficult circumstances that they're under are continuing, and they will continue for quite a long time to come. And we are expecting to be there for the duration through trying to approach this with regard to the immediate needs and looking at restoration for quite some time into the future. I would like to say that my experience has been that the agencies, the Fish and Wildlife Service, our Florida Wildlife Commission, are really working quite hard to try and address the impacts on wildlife, to assess, to recover, to restore the wildlife that are being affected. And in fact, the numbers, those of you that perhaps were at the Palladium, perhaps some of you were there, heard me give some of the numbers of what's been found so far, and or far more now. The number of birds that have been found or that have died in this crisis are nearing 2,000. The number of sea turtles, all of which are endangered, threatened species, approaching 500. The number of marine mammals, dolphins and so forth, about 60 or so. But this really represents a small amount of what's really happening. And we know that from experience with previous oil spills. The habitats that are affected for Florida, range from perhaps the marshes, the sandy beaches, the mangrove systems, complex systems structurally and biologically. And we hope, of course, that the coral reefs will not be affected right now, I guess because of the way the the currents and the eddies and so forth are moving. We've been very fortunate that the oil has not moved into the South Florida area, as far as I know. I want to say, with regard to what I was saying about the agencies, the Fish and Wildlife Service has dedicated 10% of its staff overall, I mean nationally, 10% are working on Gulf issues. They, with regard to the holdings of the Fish and Wildlife Service, the Department of Interior, at least 8 refuges, that's just the National Wildlife Refuges, are being affected, even as close as St. Vincent National Wildlife Refuge in the Panhandle. And the deployment of people who work on natural resource protection into the Gulf response is leaving other work, other land management and coastal and sea management without the full staffing that it needs. I want to show you some slides. I guess we don't say slides anymore, do we? That depict some of what the crises are. You'll see here how closely even whales can come to the rigs, and there are some species of wildlife that will be around the rigs, but those in that area have been devastated today. This is a picture you may have seen before of when the crisis really blew up, so to speak. I mentioned that the National Wildlife Refuges, and that's just one type of unit of our public lands, and there are many others along the coast, and of course there are private lands that are still along the coast that are being affected in the other states and now into Florida, in the Panhandle. The habitat types, I said, range from marshes and sandy beaches down to our South Florida type of habitats that hopefully will be protected. Again, we're glad that in our area right now things are looking well. This is just a map of wildlife refuges in the Gulf of Mexico, and on the eastern coast also of Florida. This is one of the pelicans that was oiled. The effect on wildlife, range from the loss of insulation, which feathers provide because of being oiled, the ingestion of oil, which will, of course, affect the internal organs. Something that isn't always remembered also is that an animal that is nesting may bring oil back to the eggs or the hatchlings and fledglings at the nest, spreading oil onto them also. When they feed their young, they may be feeding them oil-marred items. When I said that the impact is global with regard to wildlife, the very first bird that was recovered was a northern gannet. This is the beautiful bird that you see on the bottom here. The gannets nest in Canada and then come through the Gulf and further into South America. So the impact really is very, very, very far. The birds that are oiled here and don't make it through are not going to be nesting, obviously, this year. Some of the reproduction can be reduced and lowered, affecting generations to come. Sea turtles. Sea turtles are affected in a number of ways. They covered in oil, of course, means that it gets on their skin and is toxic. It's a problem that way. They will actually ingest tar balls. They will swim through oil areas. And we need to remember that all stages of the life cycle of an animal can be affected. We hear about the nesting beaches and the importance, of course, of the nesting beaches in Florida, very important globally. In fact, for the Kemp's Ridley turtle, which is perhaps the most endangered of the sea turtles. They do nest in the Panhandle. Fortunately, there are a large number of loggerhead sea turtles that do. But what is happening this year? A decision has been made by very fine scientists and sea turtle biologists that the best recourse is to remove the sea turtle nest this year and move thousands and thousands of those eggs over to the east coast of Florida. It may, nobody knows what the impact will be. These are turtles whose natal beaches, the beaches where they're born would have been in the Panhandle, and they would have returned there. And what the effect will be from being moved, a whole generation moved over to the East Coast, we don't know. And another impact that's happening on sea turtles, you may have heard of the sargassum, the kind of floating mats of vegetation that actually are just filled with different kinds of life, microscopic and macroscopic, you say, wildlife. Sargassum is where little baby turtles live the beginnings of their lives. That's where they float out to or swim out to. But for some time, the sargassum mats were burnt and just eliminating that very important habitat. You see here the importance our wonderful Florida beaches are great habitat both for nesting and seagrass beds where the adult animals and all are feeding. The Atlantic bluefin tuna, a very, very vulnerable species, and for which the Gulf of Mexico provides one of two areas in the world where they breed. These are huge fish. They can be up to 1,500 pounds and 15 feet. They travel, as I understand it, can travel up to 50 miles per hour. Our fishing industry, of course, so important to our economy and to our ecology. The number of fishes in the Gulf, the wonderful variety for sport and commercial fishing, very, very important. And even whales, they're big. You'd think they might be able to withstand, a lot, but they are very vulnerable. And the loss of just a few of these animals can be very, very important to the population of a species that's as endangered as this. And something else they remind us of is that not only do they come to the surface, of course, breathing air, where they can pull in instead, oil as they're trying to breathe, or pull in the toxic fumes. But these are animals that swim at great depths. And we've learned that a great deal of this oil is at depth. Where it is, perhaps others, that's trying to be discovered. Where the oil is, where it's moving, and so forth. But one of the most important areas for whales was very near where the explosion took place and where the discharge is. There's a very deep area of the Gulf, very close by where whales congregate. You can see here a kind of a range map for whale here. I want to also bring up implications for other parts of the United States. My organization and many others work not only on these kind of issues in our very immediate area here, but also in the Arctic, and trying to be sure that proper environmental reviews are completed, that all appropriate measures are taken to be sure that whatever drilling occurs is safe, and to end it where it cannot be. And the Arctic would be an extremely difficult place to be trying to clean up a spill. The Exxon Valdez, while it was not the largest spill by any means that has occurred around the world, had perhaps, until the spill here, the greatest environmental disaster results. Difficulty in cleanup and movement of the oils. Polar bear, walrus, some very iconic species that we see in that area. I want to mention that the special session of the legislature that the governor has called for next week is where our legislators will take up the question of whether or not the people should be able to vote on whether or not we would ban oil drilling in Florida waters. Okay. We certainly believe that people should have a chance to vote on it. I hope that you do. Thank you.
While we prepare to answer your questions, one of the things that occurred to me, there's been a whole lot of different perspective on the oil that's leaking, how many barrels they're producing, how much has been spilled. And I wanted to put that in perspective for you. If you assume that there's been 50,000 barrels a day spilled in the northern Gulf, that comes down to a little over 4 million total barrels of oil. So how do you comprehend that? 4 million barrels of oil is what we in the United States consume in 5 hours of the average day. Now, that number strikes me as I'm going back to Keith's presentation, where there's this disparity, if you will, in what's going on in Florida versus the northern states. I can assure you that the United States has not felt the economic impact of losing 4 million barrels of oil. However, we're sitting here now with this perception that Florida is under this cloud where animals are suffering and people can't go on the beach, and it's just not true. However, what that I think that should do for us is to motivate us for looking at solutions here in Florida where we can do something besides drill more oil. It's not surprising that in the last week or so that the industry now has taken over airtime to do what? To tell you just how important it is they continue to drill in the Gulf of Mexico. Quoting the fact that some 14% of our national production comes from the Gulf of Mexico. What I was looking for and didn't hear, and I think what we all want to hear, is that the oil companies now tell us that we're not in the oil and gas drilling business anymore, but we're in the energy business, and that same 14% is going to be produced in renewables instead of oil and gas. Okay, I think we're ready now to answer some of your questions.
Encourage you to pass your questions to the center aisle, and that young lady will pick them up. There's a couple.
Okay. Thank you, Jim. We have an online question that perhaps both Keith and DT can answer. In terms of paid hotel nights per year in Pinellas County, what % of rooms are typically filled by foreign tourists or out-of-state tourists?
DT. Our international business in Pinellas County is approximately 20% of our overall business. And out of state, I don't know the exact number, but it's probably around 50% of our business. So but international is 20%. The big thing with international, though, is that's 20% visitors, but they stay twice to 3 times as long as a domestic visitor, and they spend a considerable amount of more money than a domestic visitor.
Keith, do you have something to add to that?
Yeah, our numbers echo that as well. I think that's a fair depiction. And most of those, by the way, are UK, Germany. Those are our bread and butter international markets.
Okay, very good. We have another question that was submitted by the audience. What truth is there in the hearsay that there is danger from pressurized methane gas, which could lead to an explosion of massive proportion? I'll try to handle that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I don't know about the word hearsay I see that was used in this question. However, that methane, we saw that created a problem when they were first putting the cap on the well. Because at very cold pressures, what happens is that methane gas turns icy, if you will. And that's, by the way, what you find under the Arctic Ocean. You find gas that sits there in an icy gel, so to speak. I don't know that this is I can't see that as a big problem here. Certainly in the drilling industry, handling gas is the #1 problem. If you don't do that, you're really not doing your job. So I don't see that as a big problem creating any risk of an exposure in any kind of massive way. Okay, this is a question from the audience, from Deborah. Is there anyone in the Tampa Bay area monitoring air pollutants being released at the oil spill site? And if so, what are the results? Do you folks have any information on that?
The question was at the site or the county air quality?
Well, they said at the oil spill site.
No, I just want to ask.
Okay.
I want to know, is the air quality here being monitored for the pollutants that are being released?
Thank you for the clarification.
Yes, the county, Pinellas County is monitoring the air quality. Yes, that is happening. Sorry?
Where do I get that information about what the results are of the air quality?
The county website, and I'm not sure exactly where it would be on there, but there's the environmental section of the county website. You should be able to find some information on that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we have another question from our audience. What are the plans to keep oil out of the Intracoastal Waterway, and where is the equipment to do so coming from?
Currently there's booms on standby. The plan is that they would boom the inlets and the estuary sections. They can't boom the beaches. And what would happen is the Coast Guard's monitoring the water situation, and if it gets within 94 miles of the coastline, then they would begin booming. The 94 miles is that loop current barrier, and the shelf area is what my understanding, what I've been told, that the Coast Guard is very involved in this, and that's my understanding. They would only be able to boom the estuary and the mangroves and that kind of thing, because that's all they have of the boom. And the beaches they can clean, but they can't clean, obviously you can't clean mangrove roots. So that's my understanding of what the situation is.
Thank you, DT. There's a clarification here. I assume the booms that you're talking about would also be there to protect Tampa Bay? Because the original, we phrased it Intracoastal Waterway, would the general Tampa Bay area be protected the same way?
They can't boom across
Okay.
the entrance of the bay.
Very good. Okay. Another question. Are the media people exaggerating long-term effects? Didn't a similar event near Mexico, 1980s, completely recover with time? Somebody want to handle it?
I'd like to start to answer.
Okay, Laurie.
I'm not sure what all the different media reports are, but we still see today, a couple decades later, that there are impacts from the Exxon Valdez and other oil spills. There are dead zones in various parts of the world where they don't even have, restrictions as tight as our own. And as I was mentioning, we really don't know for generations to come what the impacts will be. I don't think we should be alarmist in making predictions that we don't know the answers to. Just highly speculative kinds of things. We need to keep with sound science, but the experience tells us the impacts will last for a long, long time.
I met with the officials from Alaska that handled the Valdez, the tourism officials, but they also told me that I believe it's a smelt, it's a small fish, sorry, that industry, that was 20 years ago in that industry, there still is none of these smelt out there. They're gone. The other thing is if you dig down in the sand where the Valdez happened, still 20 years, there's still oil there. On terms of long-term effect on tourism, it took Alaska huge amounts of money for a 5-year period before Americans felt like it was safe to go to unless there wasn't oil. And this spill was very contained in an off. You had to hike into where this was. It wasn't a tourism destination. So there were long-term effects. Any of the long-term Pinellas County residents here remember the tanker that collision with the oil. That was 360,000 gallons. I mean, there's more than that coming out in a minute, but that was 360,000 gallons. It affected 18 miles of our 35-mile beach. It was cleaned up in a relatively quick amount of time, but it took 2 years for the occupancy rates and the average daily rates to rebound on the south end of the county after that spill. So this is a long-term thing. That's why we're going to need money to market and to retain our tourism industry. It's going to be a long-term battle.
And to restore the habitat.
And absolutely to restore the habitat, yes.
I wanted to mention that the largest spill on record, which happened in 1991 in the Persian Gulf, spilled 10 million barrels. Interestingly, in 2008, the Saudis and the Germans did a study which was to try to determine what had been the long-term impact. So that was a good, 17, 18 years or plus. And frankly, I'm trying to get a hold of a copy of that to use because that is, that we could use as something to go by where a deep study was done. I have another comment here from the audience. Comment relative to the statement that we're releasing in Florida adult pelicans so that they can return to the exact spot where they hatched. I think that's a question. Can you tell us about that, Laurie?
About whether pelicans return
Yeah, with
to
the adult pelicans that were released here, when they hatch, are they likely to return to where they were originally hatched?
I don't know that pelicans are, well, they're not as strongly what we call philopatric or patriotic to the place where they were hatched out. I think that, you know, the population is going to. Mm-hmm. All right, thank you, Ralph. The sea turtles will certainly go to the very same beaches where they have hatched out from. We won't know what's going to happen with this generation, what will happen.
Thank you, Laurie.
Yeah, I don't know if you all heard. Ralph was saying that a pelican will go back to the very same nesting place.
This might be for a little bit later, but there's a multi-part question here. One, is there a plan in action to clean up the oil before it hits the coast? What can we do? And the complementary to that was, is it not possible for the Tampa Bay area to prepare ahead by purchasing or manufacturing booms or barriers that could be installed from pier to pier on the Sunshine Skyway Bridge? What do you think?
I'll take a shot at the first part of the question. I don't know the science about, as I understand it, the booms, and I've listened to BP representatives as well as DEP representatives. I've testified before the Senate, the House. I've listened to them probably 10 times now. And the booming technology is pretty weak. I mean, things like currents and waves, and whether it's for deep water or shallow water, they're using them in the wrong application. My take on it as a layman, not being an expert in it, is that I wouldn't put a lot of faith or invest a whole lot of money in the booming process. I just, from whatever I'm hearing, is that it's not going to work. Right. But I will tell you this, I sat on a panel speaking on Clean Energy Works in Washington, D.C., and Kevin Costner happened to be there at the time, and he was trying to sell his equipment. And I think finally our federal government has started to open the doors to people who have innovative technology out there that can go out and clean up the oil beyond, a fishing boat. And that's great. We should have as many of those out there as we can. But from what I can tell, the cleanup is going to have to occur at the site. I think all bets are off if it gets outside of the site and beyond a containment range that they can't use that kind of technology for. I just don't think the booms are going to work from everything that I've listened to. And again, I'm not an expert, but I listen carefully because it's a concern of mine. We have the largest beach in Pinellas County. We don't want it on our beach, but they continue to tell you, well, it's going to be easy to clean up there. It's not going to be easy to clean up somewhere else. So,
Thank you, Keith. Here's a question from the audience from Bill. If drilling a relief well is the ultimate solution to stopping a spill, why not drill the relief well at the same time as the main well? That's an interesting question. I'll answer that one.
Give it to
money.
Yeah, money in simple terms. The drilling of the Horizon well was several $100 million. The cost of the platform that they're using was a $400 million platform. So there's serious money. However, what that really speaks to, I think, is what precautions could we take, could say the U.S. government take, for people drilling in the Gulf to prepare for such a spill? I think a lot of people would say they can't. I mean, that's what's coming out of this, is that how do you handle that? So that's possible, to drill 2 wells at the same time. I don't know that anybody's ever done that, simply for economics. I have another question here from Valerie. Which state has been hurt the worst by the oil spill? Where does Florida start in this matter?
I can answer that.
Yeah, I think
Florida is, if you're talking about environmentally, from physical impacts, Florida has been the least affected. There's no question Louisiana, Mississippi, they've been devastated. To see what's happened out there is heartbreaking. Now, I'm not diminishing the fact that Pensacola, westerly, and Escambia and Bay County and some of those areas in the further western part of the Panhandle have not had significant impacts. They have, but when you have 2,800 miles of beaches and you can isolate it to that small area, it's fairly minimal in Florida at this point. So.
Thank you, Keith. There's a second part to this which is interesting, because there's been a lot of questions about this. Is the U.S. now accepting all the help needed from foreign nations? Has BP mentioned anything of that in your
I've been wondering about the answer to that myself.
Yeah.
Whoever asked that question, that's a good question.
Yeah. Okay. One more. Russia has had leaking wells before, and from what I have read, they blow them up. Please explain that and why we didn't.
You answer that.
Do they not know we're the dumb tourism guys?
We're the tourism wildlife.
You know, that's an interesting question. I don't know anybody that does that, perhaps, besides the Russians. If you go back to the Iraq War, when the Kuwaitis were left with every single well was blown and oil flowed out of every single well in that country. Huge fires, smoke going downstream. I remember it well because I was smelling it. And basically what they did was they called Red Adair, and they managed to put it out. They did not have to blow it up. But I understand that some people have suggested that. I don't know that there's any real experience in how to do that.
The reason that they blow up wells, I'm a firefighter and I work with the reason that they blow up wells is not to pull the fire apart, to blow the inside of the well and have it all flat. So
Right.
It's to knock the oxygen off the well so that you now have free-flowing oil so that you can actually go over and tap it. So you actually got to knock the fire off the oil, off the well before you can actually tap it. It's already out underneath the water.
Oh, we have an expert in the audience on that question.
Until they have it tap ready.
Yeah.
I'm not second-guessing whoever.
Okay. Okay, we have a couple more minutes. Let me try to... who may I contact and how do I contact them to work on regulating or re-regulating the oil industry, specifically offshore drilling? Well, there'd be a long list for that one, huh?
Well, I can answer that. There have been a couple champions of our industry, and I would tell you two of the most prominent ones are Senator Bill Nelson and Congressman Bill Young. If those two gentlemen were not in our corner, I think we would have had leases off of our shores a long time ago. Now, to answer your question, the effectiveness of that, I can't tell you what will happen, but I can assure you they will take it up as an issue.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Keith. We have another one. Is BP compensating institutions like Defenders of Wildlife to help them with the animals? What can you tell us about that, Laurie?
Defenders of Wildlife has decided not to accept any funding from BP that might be available. We would accept funding through the National Wildlife Foundation, which does receive funding from BP and then allocates out, but we've decided not to.
Okay.
Am I being asked why?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We feel it's important to have that separation. The work that we're doing is not so much, we're not doing like the hands-on cleaning of wildlife, although we're doing beach cleanups and things like that, but we're working far more on policy and trying to achieve a sustainable and clean energy policy and act for the United States. But it's just the philosophy of our organization that best to go through the science foundations or the NGO foundations rather than straight from BP.
Okay, we have one last question. This is from Bob in the audience. Are they, meaning BP, still using dispersants, which the EPA told BP to stop using these dangerous chemicals? I don't know that they actually stopped. I know that they seem to be be given that message that these were not, it was not appropriate to be doing this, whereas BP felt that was the only way they could handle this. I personally thought that was the
I can
worst
answer the
part.
question.
Go
I can
ahead.
tell you what the BP representative stated on Monday. And the way the dispersants work is you use them until there's a certain toxicity in the water level, which then is the trigger for you to stop using them. So, they stopped, and I guess that toxicity lowered back down to a less toxic level, and then they began to use them again. So I don't know that they've ever stopped using them. I think they've strategically picked parts of the spill area, and they've used them until there are federal laws that guideline what they're supposed to do there, and they have followed them according to the statements that I've heard. But I would say comprehensively they have not stopped using them.
Thank you, Keith. That's the end of our panel. I'd like a big hand for our three experts here.
I'd like to mention that outside there are little slips like this that have the Defenders of Wildlife website on them where you can get fact sheets about the impacts of the oil spill.
Thank you again to our panel and to Dan Berard for a great job of monitoring it. Just a point of clarification, we did not run out of questions before we ran out of time. Some will be answered by the second panel, I think more appropriately. Others we'll try to follow up on after this presentation. One did come that is appropriate for me to answer, and that is, will SPC's sustainability program grow to assist in developing renewable energy possibilities? And the answer to that is yes. Both the sustainability program at the baccalaureate level and the environmental science technology program, which is brand new last year, which does have energy as one of its tracks. We'll be working on it, and as Dr. Law mentioned, we expect to have additional forums, including one on alternative energy, right here in the Digitorium on September the 2nd. So stay tuned for that. Good question. We invite the second panel to please come up. We're going to change the name tags, and while we're in traditions, you can kind of get up and stretch, but I do want to, while we're taking a break, want to share with you that Congressman Young regrets he couldn't be here with us tonight. As you may know, the House is in session up in Washington, and one of the legislative items they're working on this month is comprehensive oil spill response and recovery legislation. No one has been a greater champion for protecting Florida's coastline than Congressman Young. It was his foresight to offer an amendment to the appropriations bill way back in 1983 that created the first buffer zone to protect Florida's and Pinellas County beaches. And as he protected with that amendment the buffer zone, he also extended it through legislative protection in 2006. That buffer zone is now 234 miles from the coast of Pinellas County. And while Congressman Young couldn't be with us this evening, his staff is here taking notes. You should have received from them, if you haven't, I know Shirley is here, his latest introduction of the Safeguards Act to further protect our coast. So please excuse Congressman Young. He would like to have been here and brings his greetings. You also have in your packets a green sheet. That is to advertise a renewable Sustainable Business Conference and Expo to be held on this campus in October. If you are a business owner or a public policy official or a licensed practitioner, you will want to look at this. It's going to be a great opportunity for some hands-on learning. And the last comment I would make, and then I think that we have our panel in place, is that there are more comment cards. If you used your comment card and want to make another comment for the second panel, we're going to follow the same drill, hear from the panelists, and then collect the cards down the center of the aisle at the end of their comments. There are some cards in the back. So with that, I'm going to ask Susan Glickman to come up, convene our second panel, and get us back underway. Sorry for moving along, but as you can tell, we've got a tremendous amount of information to disseminate this evening. Susan.
Great. Thank you so much. I'm Susan Glickman. I'm the director of the Florida Business Network for a Clean Energy Economy. And if we can, I'll give you guys a moment or two to get in your seats. And tonight, of course, we're hearing about the current realities and how we're responding to the oil spill in the short term and in the medium term. My role in all this is going to be more at that third series of the series on October 2nd when we talk about solutions. So this will never happen again. This oil spill is a giant wake-up call that how we are meeting our energy needs is simply unsustainable. And it's almost like being hit over the head by a 2x4 because there's a lot of people in this room, like my state representative Jim Frisch over there, and Bill Smith, a councilman who's here from Indian Shores, and R.B. Johnson, and Shahara Anderson from Senator Nelson's office. And I've probably missed someone. I'm a lobbyist, and you can't miss anybody or you get into big trouble. But anyway, thank you so much to Bill Law and to Jim Oliver for doing this, and particularly for Senator Dennis Jones, who is among those people who works incredibly hard and has for many years to protect Florida's beaches, as well as Janet Long, who's a good friend of mine. So we have some really excellent people here to talk to you guys tonight. In particular, Robert Weisberg, who's with the College of Marine Sciences at University of South Florida, is very much in demand. He's sort of rock star status in the oil spill world. So you are, this is the person that the government goes to when they have to figure out, where to dump the waste from the Piney Point spill or whatever's happening. He's a physical oceanographer, and his specialty is in ocean circulation and ocean atmosphere interaction, studies the tropics and the continental shelves and estuaries. So we are very lucky to get firsthand information about where things are at, and I'll invite you up here so that you can have command of the clicker.
Okay, so well, my name is Bob Weisberg, and so far you haven't had to suffer a lecture from a professor, and now you get to do that. After all, this St. Pete College. All right, so I'm going to try to give you a feeling tonight for how the movement of the ocean circulation impacts this oil spill and where it may go. Because after all, it is the water that carries the oil, and so it's the circulation of the ocean that will determine where that oil goes. To do this, I have a fairly extensive team in my group, and some of the names are there. And so we started doing this right on day one. I was actually on travel, and I got a call from an environmentalist who informed me of this and sought some input from me. And so I found out about this when I was in Fresno, California. I called up my staff, and I knew we had tools in place, and so I put in motion the tracking of the oil. We've been doing it ever since. So we were our first responders. And what we did is we started off with an ocean circulation model that we run in a nowcast forecast sense at USF. And over time, we added another 5 different models to it. So we're working with an ensemble of 6 different ocean circulation models, all state-of-the-art models. We initialize these models whenever we can with oil position determined from analyses of satellite imagery. And then we do a 3.5-day forecast using NOAA forecast winds. And we serve this publicly on the internet. There's a website that you'll see a number of times on my slides, and I encourage you to go there and take a look at this stuff. We also provide this information to NOAA, to their hazmat group, and they use it in their oil spill advisories every day. And so here's an example of one of these products. Roughly once or twice a week, I update a PowerPoint briefing and I send it around. And so this is from the last one I did on, I guess, Sunday. And so the panel on the left shows the position of the oil on the 10th of July. And the panel on the right shows the position of the oil as forecast from that point through the 14th of July. And we update this on a daily basis. When we put together an ensemble of forecasts using different models, in this case it's 4 different models, recognizing that all models have errors, and therefore it makes no sense whatsoever to just choose one model. You should choose as many as you can get your hands on. For the same reason, for example, that the National Hurricane Center uses an ensemble forecast for where a hurricane may make landfall. So what you can see here from these 4 different models is that they're all more or less the same, but they're slightly different. There are subtle differences. And from forecast cycle to forecast cycle, we find that no single model is always the best. It kind of varies. On the continental shelf itself, in the shallow water region, the one that my group runs is probably about the best because it has the highest resolution. In the deep ocean, some of these other models perform better because they actually assimilate data from the deep ocean into the model, which makes a more accurate forecast. We actually nest our model, which is the upper left panel. We nest it into a model run by the US Navy. And so we get the conditions from the deep ocean from the Navy's model, and we use that to run ours forward in time. And so let's talk a little bit about these currents. You've all heard about the loop current. So let me preface this by saying that to understand what the conditions are in Tampa Bay, you can't just look at Tampa Bay. You have to look at the interactions between Tampa Bay and the adjacent coastal ocean. And to understand the conditions in the adjacent coastal ocean, you can't limit your activity there. You have to look in the deep ocean as well. And so it's a very complicated system wherein the deep ocean, coastal ocean interactions, and the coastal ocean estuarine interactions are all important. So that's what we try to do. So let's first look at these deep ocean currents, and we'll start with the loop current. So these are analyses from what we call satellite altimetry, and the arrows are the direction of, and the speed of the current. The colors happen to be sea surface height, but just look at the arrows. And what you see is the loop current entering the Gulf of Mexico through the Yucatan Strait, looping around in the Gulf of Mexico, and then exiting through the Florida Straits as the Gulf Stream, and then it goes up the East Coast. The map on the left was the situation on May 9th. At that point, I would not have guessed that an eddy would break off. So typically what the loop current does is it's always in the Gulf of Mexico. The only thing that really varies is how far north it extends before it turns around and comes back. And so on May 9th, we see that it was getting pretty close to the wellhead. And at that point, my thought was that it will eventually reach the wellhead. And if it did that, it would pick up a lot of oil and carry it through the Florida Straits and up the East Coast. And by the way, it only takes about a week for oil to move once it gets in the loop current from, say, the wellhead to the Florida Straits. Another 2 weeks to go to Cape Hatteras, so it's very quick. Well, around May 20th, the loop current actually shed an eddy. And if you look on the right-hand panel, you see that this is a very recent image, that eddy now is completely separated. And it looks like it's going to stay separated at this point and eventually drift off to the west. When we look at historical data like this, we find that more times than not, the loop current reattaches to the eddy. And on many occasions, even after the eddy separates and you get a reattachment, the loop current can still go to the wellhead. That can still happen right now. It's unpredictable, so we monitor it, but it can still happen. There's still no reason why the loop current cannot go up to the wellhead, although as we can see, it certainly was a long-term reprieve from oil leaving the wellhead region and getting into the Florida Straits. To monitor this, we put satellite track drifters in the water. These are real drifters. We deploy them. These, by the way, most of these were deployed by my group. It's incredible, given all the federal resources, how little they've actually done and how much people like me have done without any support from the Unified Command. And so what this does is it maps out the behavior of the loop current. And we also put these drifters on the continental shelf itself to monitor the surface currents on the shelf. Right now, owing to two factors, one, the wind direction, which has been largely westerly for the last few days, and also the way the loop current is interacting near the dry Tortugas with the shelf, we've had very strong currents flowing from north to south. And so these drifters that you see near Tampa Bay have been flowing pretty quickly towards the south. And this will probably continue a little bit longer. The forecast winds will turn to become easterly around the 17th of July, so in a couple of days, and that should hopefully keep oil away from our coastline. So it's a trade-off between what the winds are doing and how the large-scale currents are interacting with the shelf. It took about a month and a half for oil to get to Pensacola, Florida. It then took less than a week for oil to almost get to Cape San Blas. That was really scary. So we almost did have oil on the West Florida continental shelf, the west coast of Florida, in a very short period of time, owing to two things: anomalous westerly winds and the way the loop current was interacting with the shelf slope. So for us here on the west coast of Florida, that separation of the eddy was not a good thing. For people in Miami, sure, it was a wonderful thing. But for us, it really wasn't, because it set the loop current up now to interact with the shelf in such a way as to bring water from the north to the south. I'll get back to that in a minute. So now let's switch gears and look at the currents on our shelf itself. And we do that through a bunch of different types of measurements. And so the first thing I'm going to show you is a long-term mean map. We've actually been making measurements out here for over a decade. And when I say me, I mean we. It's really me, because the federal government hasn't been doing that. They've been funding it, but they haven't been doing it. And so it's academic scientists like myself that do this around the nation. And so what we found is that there is a net flow from north to south, on average, on our shelf. And that would tend to bring oil south. It's very slow, however. We've also been making measurements long enough to analyze a seasonal cycle about that mean. And so for us here on the west coast of Florida, if you look at the June and July observations, they show that the flow tends to be from south to north. Other times of the year it's from north to south. So we're in a good time of year now, at least to keep oil away from our shoreline, except, as I've said already, combination of anomalous winds. The winds tend to be southeast now, but we do get periods of westerly winds, and anomalous interactions of the loop current with the continental shelf, particularly near the dry Tortugas, that can bring oil and water and whatever, toward the west coast of Florida. So I'll get back to the threats in a minute, but all these things are important. Okay, we actually also make real-time measurements, and we serve these on the internet. We supply them to NOAA. They're used from a collection of buoys that we have offshore. And so you've probably heard about these in the news. I've been talking a lot about the fact that We really have no funding to keep these things going. But there are 4 buoys right now that are functioning and reporting data in real time, available on the internet. And they're shown in those locations. They also report winds. And along with these moored buoys, we have what are called high-frequency radars. And they're radars that send a signal out from the beach, bounces off of waves, and from that we can determine how fast the water is moving at the surface. And so that's a map of the surface currents from a couple of days ago, and these are also in real time on the internet. So all of these tools allow us to actually see how the water is moving off our shore on a daily basis. Now, we don't have to just worry about the surface, although that's all you're hearing about, because the ocean is pretty deep and there is stuff below the surface. And so we have to worry about subsurface tracking as well. So again, beginning right at the outset, we started tracking where subsurface oil may go if there was subsurface oil. We still don't have definitive measurements on this, by the way, which is kind of absurd 3 months in. So what you're looking at are trajectories from the 20th of April at 4 different depths, starting at 1,400 meters, which is almost towards the bottom of the well, and 1,000 meters, 400 meters, and 100 meters. And as you go higher in the water column, there's a larger dispersion of material that may be in the water. There have been observations of subsurface hydrocarbons, so not big globs of oil, but very low concentrations of hydrocarbons that have been traced back to the BP well. These measurements have been made by people at my institution and also people at other institutions. We haven't really had the opportunity to map out where this stuff is yet, but it's out there. It's an unknown threat. And at least we're trying to provide guidance of where ships could go to make these observations. But let me tell you why it's important. So this is a map of surface temperature on the left-hand side, and then a map of the bottom currents on the right-hand side in 1998, which was a year, kind of like this year, when the loop current shed an eddy, and the loop current was then impacting the dry Tortugas in a way that was causing water to flow southward along the West Florida continental shelf. And so the cold water that you see off of Sanibel, obviously, and that was July, by the way, just like this is now July, that did not originate by Sanibel. It was hot there. It originated at what we call the continental shelf break in the Florida Big Bend. And so right now, we're in that same situation. We have upwelling of cold water across the shelf break in the Florida Big Bend region. And eventually, if these conditions continue, that water will pop up along our beaches. Now, if it's nice, pristine water, fine. If it has stuff in it that's toxic, that's not so fine. And so this really is a threat. You know, it's hidden. And we're not mapping it out. And to me, that's absolutely ludicrous that we're not doing that. All right, so let me switch gears. We went from the deep ocean to the coastal ocean. Now let's talk about Tampa Bay specifically. And so Tampa Bay is an estuary. There are very interesting circulation patterns associated with estuaries. And we have to worry about not only what's at the surface, but also what's at depth. In an estuary, generally water flows out the surface, flows in near the bottom. And we've done a lot of work on Tampa Bay. And so here's an example of one of these, a grid for one of these models for Tampa Bay that has the entire bay, the Intracoastal Waterway, Sarasota Bay, St. Joseph Sound, all of the inlets, all resolved very finely in one given model construct that also deals with the interactions between the coastal ocean and the estuary. And we published papers on this in 2006. And you know, we've demonstrated that we can account for the salinity field at the bottom and the top throughout the water column. We've demonstrated we can account for the complex flow patterns throughout the bay. And so these tools exist. We've then actually as a matter of this particular crisis, we recognize that we need better modeling tools to deal with the nearshore regions and the interactions between not only Tampa Bay, but the other estuaries and the coastal ocean as well. And so this is a brand new thing that we just put together, and we're going to have it in a nowcast forecast mode very, very soon. Very highly resolves our nearby estuaries, Florida Bay. We've done it, it works, and let me get to the gist of the matter now. So, threat level for Tampa Bay. There is no immediate threat to Tampa Bay, and so I'm glad to hear all the activities by our local business people, and I agree with you. There is no threat to Tampa Bay, and when anybody asks me, that's exactly what I tell them. However, the longer the oil spill goes on, the more that threat becomes potentially a reality. And it's a combination of anomalous westerly winds or loop current interactions, particularly near the dry Tortugas, that could bring oil our way, not only at the surface, but also beneath the surface to the extent that oil exists there. I have to mention to everybody at this point that, the reef fish, the gag grouper, live at the shelf break on the bottom. That's where they make that's where the houses are. And biologists call it habitat, I call it a house. They're not going to be impacted directly by surface oil. They're going to be impacted by toxic levels of stuff beneath the surface. I'm not saying there are toxic levels there. We really don't know. But we sure ought to know, and we don't. And that's a serious problem. So, are we prepared? Oh, yeah, I should say that in the fall, these circulation patterns change dramatically. So once the fronts start coming through, then the seasonal circulation patterns are from north to south. We really want that oil cleaned up, or at least we want it to stop gushing before fall comes through, or we're going to see oil off the west coast of Florida. Will it hit the beaches? I don't know, but we will see it off the west coast of Florida. Okay, is Tampa Bay prepared? My answer is no. We may have boom positioned, we may have a big Coast Guard contingent, and maybe a lot of people that are marshaled to do something, but what will they do? We have no tools in place to predict how oil will get in our inlets through our Intracoastal Waterway into Tampa Bay, how it will circulate around in Tampa Bay. These tools, they exist, they're just not implemented. Why are they not implemented? Well, because there just hasn't been any interest amongst the agencies. And I'll indict all of them, from the local agencies to the state agencies to the federal agencies. There seems to be no interest in recognizing that the water in the ocean moves. It's not a stagnant bucket. It moves. And everything that has to do with ecology depends on the movement of that water, but it's ignored. And so we're not prepared, and that's something that needs to be remedied. And so we actually do need sustained funding to run these models. We have good models, we have good people. It's been ignored. And I already mentioned the impediments. And so at this point, I'll thank you for your attention, and I'll be ready to try to answer some questions later when that time period arises. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. Now, you all are the most up-to-date audience in the entire state on where the currents stand. Next, we're going to hear from David Sorrick, who's a vice president of power generation for Progress Energy Florida. So he oversees the company's fleet of oil and coal and natural gas-fired power plants. So we're going to be talking a little more later, as you know. Joined us in Florida in 1988. So we appreciate your being here tonight.
Well, good evening. I appreciate the opportunity to participate in this discussion panel tonight. It's a great, I think, forum to discuss a very serious issue that can impact all of us. And what I'd like to do over the next few minutes is briefly describe Progress Energy Florida's generating system and fleet, talk about some of the impacts that we consider to be adverse to our equipment as potential impacts from the oil spill, and then talk about some of the mitigation efforts that we've taken so far. I will say right up front, one of the things that we noticed very early in this crisis was the unpredictability that Dr. Weisberg talks about, the scope, where the oil may track. And so within a week of the situation, we put together an interdepartmental planning team to make sure that we were proactive and covered all the planning that could affect our power plants and our ability to serve our customers. So if you think about Progress Energy, we're an investor-owned utility, and we serve over 1.6 million customers here in our Florida service territory. We have 14 power plant sites, and those sites are home to 76 generators. Those 76 generators can produce over 10,000 megawatts of electricity. So that's what we would call our capacity in megawatts. We have many different types of generators, and they use different types of fuel, as Susan mentioned. And so they all have different design parameters and different needs that we have. So some will be more impacted than others if the oil reaches our facilities. Some of our units need cooling water, and we would typically take this cooling water out of a large body of water, use it in the process of making electricity, and then return it to that body of water. Two of our facilities are located on the Gulf of Mexico, Crystal River and Anclote. Two of our facilities are located on Tampa Bay, Bartow and Bayboro. And so those are the facilities that we're most concerned about the impact of this oil situation. Crystal River is located in Citrus County. It's about an hour and a half north of here, and there are 5 total units on that site, 1 nuclear unit and 4 fossil coal units, a total of 3,200 megawatts. So you can see at that one site, that's about 32% of our overall company's capacity here in Florida. Anclote is located just north of here in Tarpon Springs, and we have 2 units there, about 1,000 megawatts total at Anclote. Our Bartow facility is our newest facility. It came online in June of last year, and it really is a state-of-the-art combined cycle gas-fired facility, 1,100 megawatts. That's located here in Pinellas County on Weeden Island. And then our Bayboro plant is located in downtown St. Petersburg. Now, Crystal River, Anclote, and Bartow all need cooling water for their process. Bayboro doesn't. Different kind of plant, but we still receive fuel from barges there, and I'll talk about the impacts of that here in a minute. The plants at Crystal River, Anclote, and Bartow are all designed to use salt water in their processes. So we'll take water from the Gulf or the Bay, and they're designed to handle that. What they're not designed to handle is a significant amount of oil in the salt water. As you can imagine, at a power plant that has really hundreds or thousands of pieces of equipment, we have pumps, motors, condensers, cooling towers, fans, valves, just lots of equipment. That equipment does not mix well with oil in the water. The impact that that could cause us is contamination of the equipment, extra cleaning of the equipment, loss of efficiency of that equipment, and ultimately the overall reliability of the equipment itself. So that's definitely a concern for us. Each of these plants also receive fuel via barge. Now to date, we haven't had any issues with barge traffic. Some of the barges have had to go around the spill, maybe go a little bit farther, take a little bit longer to get here, but we receive coal and oil via barge. If the spill becomes widespread enough, then it could impede our ability to receive fuel at these facilities. I know that, again, to date we haven't had an issue. I know that there are cleaning stations that have been set up out in the Gulf. However, that is something that remains a risk for us. Now, our system at Progress Energy operates as part of a larger electric grid here in Florida. And we interact with our neighboring utilities, who, by the way, could be impacted in the same ways that we are. And we've talked to them, and we're all been very proactive. We've taken this seriously, and we're making generally the same plans. So as part of a larger grid in Florida, the concern is what would the reliability of the electric grid be in Florida? Now, right now, we talked about our 3 plants, but if you think about the coast of Florida, it's home to a lot of things. TradeWinds and other great hotels. Also, power plants really like the coast. So on the west coast of Florida, there are 8 plant sites, 18 units. On the east coast of Florida, 7 plant sites, 17 units. So you can see the coast of Florida houses a lot of electrical capability. One of the things that we're concerned about, widespread impacts of the oil spill, would be our ability as a state to serve the electric customer. The Florida Reliability Coordinating Council is an entity that oversees and tries to help guide the reliability of the grid in Florida, and all of us as operating utilities participate with FRCC. To date, and as Dr. Weisberg has said, very, very low impact to the state from that standpoint. FRCC at this point in time sees a very low probability of having reliability issues with the fleet or with the grid in Florida. So far, so good. But again, the unpredictability is something that we want to be ready for. Some of the actions that we've taken to date. We've established an incident coordinator and a multi-departmental team. We've had representatives from operations, corporate communications, regulatory, our environmental groups, and we've all come together on a regular basis. In fact, we have daily calls to coordinate our responses. One of the main things that we've done is we've revised our site-specific facility response plans. Each of our plants has a plan in the remote event that there's an oil spill to contain the oil, clean the oil up. Now, those plans are in place and are reviewed regularly. Keep in mind, those plans are in place to keep oil in the plant, not to keep oil out. So it's a subtlety, but we had to do some thinking on really how to keep the oil out of the plants. And so we've revised those plans to include countermeasures for that oil. Some booms, some other technologies, air curtains, and so forth that we would employ in our intake structures in the event that we saw a significant amount of oil intrusion. We've also coordinated with a lot of our shareholders, or stakeholders, I should say, in a broader sense. The DEP, the Coast Guard, PSC. We want to make sure that all of our stakeholders are informed on what we're doing, how we're being proactive, and what we want to do to make sure that if we see oil at our sites, we're able to deal with it. We know that we'll have extra labor costs with cleaning. We know that we'll have a lot of extra work to do if the oil gets here. So, Dr. Weisberg, we need to work a little more closely together, I think, on completely understanding where this is going. So with that, I would say, well, the last thing I want to mention is we've also established a cost tracking system so that we can understand how much this effort will cost, and it's our goal that our customers don't pay for this. We will go back and file claims with BP in the event that we incur cost on this, and so that's something else that we want people to be aware of. Finally, I would say that we have a lot of experience in operating our system through a lot of different things, storms, hurricanes, wildfires, you name it. I think we've seen it until this oil spill. We'll take our experience that we've earned the hard way in some cases, we'll use that, and our primary goal here is to work safely and to continue to deliver reliable electric service through this event. Thank you.
David, thank you so much for being here. Appreciate it. And next, you're going to hear from a person who sort of embodies the notion of a public servant. George Sheldon is the Secretary of the Department of Children and Families. He was appointed by the governor in 2008. He was a 4-term legislator in the House of Representatives and is on the governor's task force on the oil spill. So he's going to bring us up to date.
First of all, let me congratulate St. Pete Community College on the selection of your new president, Bill Law. I'm from Tallahassee. Actually, you stole Bill from Tallahassee Community College, but I think he'll lead this institution well. I have two capacities. One as Secretary of the Department of Children and Families, and then secondly, as a member of the Governor's Task Force on Economic Recovery following the impact of the oil spill. I also chair the work group of that task force overseeing the BP claims process. So what I want to do is kind of give you a view as to what's going on in Florida's response. Immediately following the disaster at the Deepwater Horizon facility, the Emergency Operations Center in Tallahassee was activated. At that point, representatives of the Coast Guard, BP, the Department of Health and Human Services, and other agencies, state and federal, came to that facility and are operating as we speak. The Department of Environmental Protection is the lead agency in dealing with the environmental impacts of this. And that Emergency Operations Center is working with emergency operations centers at this point, primarily throughout the Panhandle. I've been now throughout North Florida, Pensacola, Navarre, Destin, Panama City, and in reality, and I think you've already heard, there's minimal oil that has touched the beaches of Florida. Some tar balls in the Pensacola area and over to Cape San Blas. But the impact of the oil is a fraction of the impact of what this is doing to Florida. And if you look at the Panhandle, here, as I understand it, your tourist season is primarily a winter season. In the Panhandle, their tourist season is June, July, and August, and that's 60% of the income of those guests. In addition to that, you have a substantial seafood industry throughout the Panhandle, the oyster industry, and as what has happened is there is this huge, dark psychological cloud that has descended on the Panhandle. And if we don't begin to get our arms around and shut off this oil, I'm concerned that that psychological cloud will transcend Florida. I saw it, frankly, in the weathered face of a commercial fisherman in Panama City who operates 44 boats and actually long line fishes all the way up the East Coast, but is now wondering whether he can, and there's a real interesting dynamic because he's having a tough time getting deckhands because they're all working for BP, cleaning up, supposedly cleaning up oil on the beaches. And trying to maintain that, that commercial operation is a big deal for him. I saw it in the voice of a hotel owner in Pensacola whose business had dropped over the 4th of July by about 60% and was trying to figure out how to file claims with BP to recover. There was a restaurant owner in Panama City, Jimmy Petronas, who is seeing that same thing. 4th of July was a great weekend, quite frankly, for the Panhandle. But after that, business fell off dramatically. To be honest with you, 24-hour news is killing North Florida because right now our beaches are clean. That's true here. And the fish that are caught off the shores are fresh and good to eat. That perception we've got to deal with. And BP, at the governor's request, did give Florida $50 million, a portion of that to begin doing some advertising to get people to Florida. The Surgeon General of the United States is tomorrow going to be in Pensacola to deal with some of the psychological impacts. As Secretary of the Department of Children and Families, I've requested, as other agency heads in the 4 Gulf states had, is a set aside of dollars to deal with the mental health crisis that's going on in the Panhandle. And these are people who, I've asked for $1.7 million, Alabama's asked for $5 million, Louisiana for $10 million. The $1.7 million that we've asked for, Senator, is just for the first 90 days as we begin to get our arms around that. In addition to that, and I ask you really, as you recognize the stress that's going on in families, to think about the children of those families that are being impacted. If you look at the studies after 9/11, everyone was concerned about the individual adults, but the reality is that children in those families were dramatically impacted. What we are doing, we're going to use Representative emergency TANF dollars. We've identified some additional dollars where, and we're partnering with Lutheran Services to begin doing therapeutic youth camps in the Panhandle. These are children, there's stress in the home, people have lost their jobs or believe they're going to lose their jobs. Children are out of school and they're watching images of dead dolphins and fish and birds, and that is being internalized in these kids. Lutheran Services has done therapeutic camps primarily after hurricanes and tornadoes to try to deal with the impact on young people. The work group that I chair, the BP claims process, has been working now for a little over a month. And during that period of time have really been trying to get some understanding from BP as to how their process works. Ironically, and some changes are happening now because Ken Feinberg is coming in to take over that process. But we process in my department, we went from 1.2 million people on food stamps to 2.6 million. 90% of those applications are online. We have scanners that scan documents. These are Japanese scanners, scan documents at about 100 pages per minute, two-sided. And what BP is doing is you have to call an 800 number to get a claims number. If you go into a claims office, they're going to tell you to go back and call the 800 number to get a claims number. And then when you get that claims number, they say it takes up to 48 hours to actually for that to show up in the claims office. And in addition to that, particularly a business, actually individual claims, they're beginning to process fairly quickly. And that's been a huge change over the period of the last several months. Business claims are much more difficult, and I think you'll see that down here as you begin to get in that process, because what you have to do is there's a lot of required documentation, 3 years of income, averaging those incomes, and so you take, in the Panhandle, what's happening is they're taking boxes of documents to the local claims office. On I think twice a day, there's a courier that runs throughout the Panhandle, hired by BP, taking those boxes to New Orleans. And the hotel owner I was telling you about said he called New Orleans to say, you've got my documents. They said, we haven't received them yet. He said, I know I dropped them off. They've got to be there. She said, well, hold on the line, went back 20 minutes later, came back and says, yes, we have your boxes. If my department operated on paper documentation, we would not be able to process 2.6 million food stamps at the rate we are. I am optimistic, however, now that Ken Feinberg has come in. Ken Feinberg is already moving in the direction of electronic transmission of documents. He's already saying that we've got to streamline this process in order to make it as customer-friendly as humanly possible. They're looking at our recommendation at one-stop claims offices, which would include crisis counseling, which would include the ability to file for small business loans, for temporary cash assistance, food stamps, and economic injury recovery loans, state bridge loans. We had identified, as you went through those claims offices in the Panhandle, a substantial difference from claim office to claim office. And it depended on the adjusters in those claims offices. And those adjusters don't work for BP. They hired ESIS, I don't know what ESIS stands for, but ESIS. And ESIS hired Worley, and Worley hired the adjusters. So that in some claims offices, you could go in and immediately see someone. Other claims offices, they would call you to make an appointment, and other claims offices, you had to call them to make an appointment. I think Ken Feinberg is trying to standardize that in such a way as there is not only can you file electronically, not only can you do will they do document scanning, but also attempt to do a standardization of the education of those individuals. There are a lot of additional things that the work group has transmitted to BP and now to Ken Feinberg, such as trying to provide incentive vouchers to hotels and restaurants to attract businesses here. Ultimately, the governor has made it very clear that BP is accountable and that every dime of the economic impact on this state, we will go after BP for. At this point, the $20 billion fund that was established by the president and is being overseen by Ken Feinberg, and that transition is just happening. It has not happened totally at this point. I think it will happen very quickly. Mr. Feinberg will be at our meetings the week after next. He's met with the governor this week to try to get a handle on what Florida's needs are. I think he actually is going to be operating probably out of Florida. Having said all that, I know there are a lot of doom and gloomers, but I am an optimist. I think we need to hope for the best and prepare for the worst, and that's what Florida is really trying to do. But actually, some of what has happened in Louisiana and Mississippi and in the Panhandle, should we get in a situation where this does get into the loop ring and ultimately into the loop current, some of what experience have occurred in the first 2 months in those states may wind up benefiting other parts of the states as we begin to bring resources in, as we begin to understand this claims process and get it right. Right now, and I think the doctor has clearly indicated, the weather has been kind to us, and it has really kept a lot of this oil off the coast of Florida. You can clean up the beaches, but you cannot clean up the marshes. You cannot clean up the estuaries. You cannot replace the wildlife, whether it's turtle or oysters, and that could have a long-term implication. Ultimately, if they can shut this thing off, and we are dealing with a finite amount of oil, I think that will have a positive psychological impact, particularly in the Panhandle, and particularly in terms of our ability to deal with it. But ultimately, I think all of us are going to have to deal with this nation's appetite for oil. We can talk about all we want about this disaster, and the reality is it is a disaster of humongous proportions. But at some point in time, we're going to have to cross the bridge as a society as to what we're going to do with alternatives to oil. What are we going to do with clean energy? So I think there are a lot of people involved in Florida's response, and we're not getting everything right. But I can assure you that there are a lot of people in state agencies and in the private sector who are trying to coordinate and make things better. So thank you.
Okay, we have way more questions than we're ever going to get to. That was a tremendous panel between these three folks and our earlier panel. It was really, really, really good information, and I hope you all appreciate that you're getting it sort of hot off the press, well, as BP is working right now to cap the wells, so it's all happening. So let me go right to the first question. I hope I can read everyone's writing. If and when our coastline starts to receive oil on our beaches, are there contractors already in preparation made to be deployed, or are we going to allow BP to make these decisions? George, do you know that?
Yes. At this point, there are contractors throughout the Panhandle who are responding. One of the difficulties up there, which is a mixed message, is we're telling people to come to Florida. Our beaches are clean, and you've got these contractors walking around in hazmat suits.
Right.
And it is a conflicting message. At this point, there is probably an overabundance of contractors in the Panhandle. As I indicated, the commercial fishermen I was talking about can't hire deckhands because they've hired so many individuals, and they're hiring at much higher rates than you can make on a boat. So that is and one of the concerns that Representative Petronas had in the Panhandle is it really has created a false economy in the Panhandle because you've got, at this point, BP has thrown so much money at hiring contractors, and so people are not working in restaurants, are not working as oystermen or deckhands on boats, but long term, those dollars aren't going to be there, and that's something I think we're still trying to work on.
I had read that there was a shortage of boat captains for the normal fireworks on the 4th of July because all the boat captains were doing sort of oil spill work, so they had trouble just doing what we normally do on the 4th of July. So here's a question for David. I understand that we have to address the issue of the spill at hand, but why can't Progress Energy look at solar power as a future source, such as Texas and California have done?
Well, and I believe we have. We have a strategy called our Balanced Solution Strategy, and that's really a three-pronged approach at how we want to move forward to provide energy in the future. Part of that is centered around state-of-the-art power plants. Part of it is around energy efficiency programs, and we have one of the largest energy efficiency programs in the nation. And part of it is around alternative energy sources like solar, renewables, and other proven technologies.
And just for the record, there were actually a whole stack of questions sort of along those lines. So I think you.
Okay.
Was there anyone else that wanted to talk a little bit to that topic, Bob?
Sure. So, as I mentioned, we've been making measurements for quite some time, and one of those measurements on these buoys happens to be wind. And so we can actually make, based on real data, not made-up stuff, but real data, what the potential is for, say, offshore wind generation on the west coast of Florida. And so the straight and skinny goes something like this. If you take a GE 3.6 megawatt turbine, which is a monster, it's equivalent to the area of Raymond James Stadium, it's put on end, and you deploy that in the west coast of Florida, it will generate about 1 megawatt on average because the winds, they aren't too strong here. And so to replace, say, the Crystal River plant, which is 3.5 gigawatts, you need 3,500 of these, which is just, silly. And so we have to balance the desire for alternative power with the reality of what nature really provides, and that's a difficult concept. And so it's not as simple as it sounds. It's nature provides a certain amount. We're entitled to take just so much of that according to the physics of alternative energy generation. And so we have to be realists about it, even though we all want alternative energy.
So let me shift to, I want to shift to the question of a hurricane. What would we be looking at in the Gulf if there was a major hurricane? And a sort of related question was about the amount of oil that we know is coming from the wellhead, but yet only relative small amounts of oil have hit any of the shores, really. So can we sort of speak to that, and then the possibility of what does a hurricane mean? I've heard a lot about hurricanes and dispersants, how that would throw the dispersant problem into a whole other arena if we had a hurricane.
Okay, well, all right, let me try to begin on that one. There's basically two parts to this question. First of all, the reason why we've seen very little oil on the beaches, with the exception, of course, of Louisiana, is that the well is in deep water, in 1,500 meters of water. It's very difficult to take anything that's in deep water and move it into shallow water. It's just trying to collapse this much into this much in terms of depth. It just doesn't work. And so the first places to get oiled were the tip of the bird's foot, because that extends almost out to very deep water, and then Pensacola, because of DeSoto Canyon, it brings deep water very close to Pensacola. Once those areas were oiled, then oil was able to move along a shallow water path to cover other places. The state of Mississippi beaches just got oiled recently because the continental shelf is wide there. So that's why there hasn't been too much oil on the beach. Now, what would a hurricane do? Well, it depends critically on where that hurricane is. So, for example, if a hurricane went ashore somewhere in Georgia and then headed west, on the northern part of the Gulf of Mexico, the winds would be very strong out of the west, and it would blow oil our way. If, on the other hand, a hurricane went in through, say, the Florida Straits, the winds in the Panhandle would be very strongly easterly, and oil would go to Texas. And so you really can't predict in advance what a hurricane would do until you know what the track of that hurricane might be. So anything can happen. But certainly oil would move over great distances, and oil would get dispersed quite a bit.
So there are a number of people, Bob, that are concerned about your funding. So they want to know if you could steal some of the money from the College of Marine Sciences that are doing the ship tracking. Anyway, there were a series of questions about NOAA's disappointing response to the severity of the situation. And then Michelle Simoneau from the Suncoast Seabird Sanctuary and Ralph Heath, I wanted to acknowledge you both. And Michelle asked the question, has USF asked BP for research funding, to expand your research on the surface and subsurface current patterns?
Sure, and the answer is yes. It's not just USF. There's a group called the Florida Institute of Oceanography, which operates some vessels that are housed at USF, but it really is a statewide facility. And so there was a request by this FIO, Florida Institute of Oceanography, for $100 million from BP. And BP offered $10 million, and FIO said, hey, great, I'll take it. And but there's 21 different institutions that comprise FIO. And so there was a proposal call, and a lot of proposals were written. There were 233 proposals written. I wouldn't have done it that way, but that's the way it was done. So yeah, there will be some nominal funding, but it won't be much. And it'll help, but it's only a start. We really need, I went and testified before a House subcommittee a few weeks ago, and I was pushing this concept of what we call an integrated ocean observing system, concept that's been around for almost a decade, but which has not received support. And all the work that I showed you actually began as part of this concept of an integrated ocean observing system. And now those resources are starting to collapse because it hasn't been funded nationally. And it's not just me and it's not just Florida. People like me around the entire nation that are trying to do this, trying to lay down the framework for understanding how water moves along our coastline and how that impacts everything we want to know about ecology. And so until we, as a nation, we get behind this, we're not going to be prepared for future crises.
So, George, can you talk a little bit about this issue of BP's assets and can they be frozen? I know that Keith Overton spoke to this idea that I think emotionally we want to boycott BP, but we certainly don't want them to go out of business. Can you talk about that for a minute?
Well, I can't speak for their financial status, but I don't see BP going out of business. I mean, this is not a small company. And if you look at their income flow, it has been substantial, but their assets around the world are substantial as well. What Florida has done, the governor has asked former attorneys general Jim Smith and Bob Butterworth to head a legal team. That they are working with attorney generals throughout the South, and at this point, the $20 billion fund is to a large extent probably the tip of the iceberg in terms of what long-term will be needed. I think Florida alone, which is of the Gulf states has had the least number of claims, as BP has already paid $29 million in individual claims to individuals for lost income. What Ken Feinberg is now saying is that instead of a week payment or a month payment, that he is going to be proceeding with a 6-month check for both businesses and individuals who had lost. But I can't speak to BP's financial status, but based on the information that we've received and the assets that they have around the world, they're not going bankrupt.
I want to go back to the subject of the boat captains. So Julie is here from the Merchant Marine Captains Association, who says they have hundreds and hundreds of U.S. Coast Guard master captains and full crews ready to relieve the crew members. So maybe part of tonight is to make connections just like that. So afterwards, maybe you can come and talk to George and make sure they know how to get a hold of you.
And let me articulate one thing about that. There are a number of boats, and at any given time, there are hundreds of boats that have been hired in the Panhandle. Some of those putting out booms, some of those doing small skimming, but a lot of those monitoring. I think what the doctor is doing, in addition to that, there is aerial surveillance of the Gulf. I believe it's every 6 hours. One of the difficulties, as I think the doctor has also pointed out, is subsurface oil, because the oil sheen is primarily what you're seeing, but as these reconnaissance flights are flying over, they see nothing, and maybe 6 hours later they'll come through and they'll see a 100-yard span of fresh oil. That's the subsurface oil that is coming to the surface. Everything I understand, and I am not a scientist, but what they have indicated to me, the oil sheen is in its final stages of decompensation. But the subsurface oil may be very well a larger problem than some of the surface oil.
It just, and tell me, Bob or George might know the answer to this, this seems like a wholly unique situation to have 150 million gallons of oil subsurface and we are clueless. Is this a first case of something quite like this?
It's not really a first case. The Ixtoc spill in 1979, which actually happened in shallow water, not deep water, but there were observations of subsurface oil there as well. What happens when you mix the oil with dispersants, it gets a little water-soluble coating on it, and if it gets broken up into small enough pieces, it can be buoyant. I mean, it could have the same buoyancy as the seawater under certain conditions. And so we know there's been subsurface oil. Let me comment on two things. One, I know we're getting a lot of lawyers involved, which, you know, is inevitable. The lessons learned from Ixtoc are hidden, largely, for legal reasons. And so things were settled and things were sealed. And so we don't really know enough about what happened during Ixtoc on that basis. You know, we really don't know that much about what happened about Katrina on that basis, the sealing of records in our legal system. And so whatever takes information out of the public and out of the scientific domain is really not very good. I understand it, but it's a complaint. Now, one of my pet peeves throughout this whole thing is that, yes, we have these aerial overflights. Every 6 hours, helicopters, C-130s, NASA fancy aerial photographs, everybody and their uncle doing this, and you know what? Nobody is collating that into a daily product of where the oil is. I've been asking for that for 2 months, and I finally have learned that nobody's doing it, and therefore it's not available. And so I'm starting to get actually maps of these overflights, but they don't do me any good because, you know, how can anybody put it together? And so why the Unified Command isn't collating all of this into one product is simply, to me, unacceptable. It costs a lot of money to fly these airplanes, and why are we flying them if the data aren't being put together properly?
I have a couple of questions about dispersants, but I wanted to acknowledge State Senator Charlie Justice, who's here in the back of the room. Always give a shout out to all the electeds. And if I missed an elected official, make sure you let me know. So what are the known impacts of the long-term effects of these chemical dispersants? And then this isn't the first panel that I've been to, and I know people locally want to assure people that the seafood is safe. So how do we know that? Did I stump the band? Is that?
Well, okay, I'll try to at least start that, but I think George might be better at it than me. You sense that I haven't been talking too kindly about the agencies, but let me switch gears. In Florida, we do certain things extremely well, and our Florida Department of Health, certainly takes care of its seafood, and so. I think that is being monitored, and I think it's being monitored very, very well.
If I could, I think, because I do think Department of Health there's some other things in terms of water testing that's going on in the Panhandle. I would encourage folks to go to the state oil spill website, and what you will see is what tracking they have had the ability to do. They're also, I believe, on that website the ability to look close to a real-time basis in the number of vessels, where those vessels are positioned. It's not the kind of detail that I think the doctor is talking about in terms of correlation of all that, but I think for the layperson, it is going to give you a perspective of what's happening.
David, do you know much more about how the ships are being cleared, sort of when they come into Tampa Bay? So we have a question about sort of transportation, and someone was asking a question about how much oil Progress Energy uses. So I don't know if that's a more generic question or from a transportation point of view, but if you could talk a little bit about the shipping. I do know that the cruise ship industry is very concerned because of the desal on the cruise ships. They can't run it through oil, so I know that's a concern.
Right. I mentioned that several cleaning stations have been set up in the Gulf, and it's my understanding the way those cleaning stations work is if a vessel of any kind encounters oil from the spill, they can go to these cleaning stations where they'll be washed and the oil that they were contaminated with captured and disposed of properly instead of tracking it across the Gulf. So we've heard from our fuel suppliers again, that they've had to take some longer routes. They try to avoid the oil. Again, all the ports are open, so we haven't encountered any of our barges that are coming to our plants with any contaminated holes, so to speak. From the standpoint of how much fuel we burn, if you look at it as a percentage, how much oil we burn, if you look at it as a percentage of our generation over the course of a year, last year, about 4.5% of our total generation from an energy standpoint was from burning oil. So it's a pretty small percentage when you look at it from the amount of energy that we produce.
Very good. So we have time for just one more question, and we have everyone's email. So the intent is we'll sort of put that all on paper and sort of send a thank you note out and respond to some of the questions that we weren't able to get to. And this is a perfect question. So what do individuals do to help with this disaster? There are a number of questions in here where people either understand engineering and have something that's really stopping the oil spill. Where is the place where people can go to? And I hear this every place I go where people want to help either as individuals or with a real technical expertise.
If you go to, I believe it's myflorida.com and go to the oil Deepwater Horizon website, Volunteer Florida is coordinating folks who are offering to volunteer, what expertise they have, and then whether it's private agencies or not-for-profits are drawing on that volunteer base. I think early on we recognized that, I saw it as we were dealing with the Florida response to the Haitian earthquake. Is there were a lot of people who wanted to help, and so there is an effort on the part of Florida to do a much more coordinated effort if people want to do that at this point.
And of course, Laurie Macdonald and Michelle Semino is here from the Suncoast Seabird Sanctuary and Defenders of Wildlife. So those two ladies know lots of opportunities. So I think we're going to close with that last question. And if I'm not mistaken, Janet Long and Dennis Jones are going to take it from here. So thank you. Get a big round of applause for this great panel.
Yes, and thanks to our panel, and also thanks to our moderator, Susan Glickman, for working us through those questions. Thank you, Susan. There were an awful lot of questions we did not get to. And Dr. Law came up and said, we need to drive them to a website, and he's absolutely right. So we have questions with, that you put your email addresses on. We'll try to get you to those individually, but we'll try to get answers to all the questions that were not answered by posting them on the Seminole website, www.spcollege.edu/SE for Seminole, www.spcollege.edu/SE for Seminole. That'll be by the end of the week for us to get all that together, but we do pledge and apologize that we were unable to get to many of the excellent questions that were asked by the audience. To close us out tonight, we have two individuals who worked very, very hard in pulling this together along with our panelists and moderators. That's State Senator Dennis Jones and State Representative Janet Law.
And we will certainly be brief, but I want to once again thank Dr. Oliver, the provost here at St. Pete College Seminole campus, for this beautiful, successful event in this beautiful setting in the Digitorium. Thank you very much. And also I'd like to thank Dr. Law. Dr. Law encouraged us to move forward with this policy event, not only the one, but the three. In addition to that, an additional event dealing with the oil crisis with the collaborative labs to bring all those things to you by this fall. And last, I'd like to thank the audience for participating in what really is an inaugural event of the new Policy Center for St. Petersburg College. I hope you will attend the next two. They are going to be made available to the public, and as the Policy Center moves forward with St. Petersburg College, it will also offer in the future credited and non-credited courses for the students in public policy and public administration. So thank you once again for attending. Now, I don't know how I got a question, but Dr. Oliver slipped me one question. I think it was a ringer. It says, geez, I hate to say this. Does Florida have an energy policy? I guess this sets the stage for the next forum, but the answer obviously is no. And if not, why? And I'm going to give I guess you won't be mad at me, will you, Janet? But anyway, the late Senator Jim King in 2009 did pass an energy bill out of the Florida Senate that said that we would have 20% energy by 2020. And we passed it out of the Senate, went to the House the last week of the session, and lo and behold, they slapped the oil drilling amendment on it and killed the bill. So that's the answer of why not. Janet, it's up to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, then. I also would like to take just a moment to thank all of the presenters that were here this evening that made the program so viable. Dan Berard, D.T. Minich, Keith Overton, Laurie Macdonald, Susan Glickman, Dr. Robert Weisberg, David Sorrick, and Secretary Sheldon. And a testament to how important this issue is to our community was their willingness to change flights, schedules, and appointments so that they could be with us here this evening. I'd also like to extend a very special thanks from all of us at St. Petersburg College and the community at large for the generosity of our sponsors. Bright House, who so willingly aired the information for this event. The St. Petersburg Times, who published our ads. Progress Energy, who plays such a critical role in the solutions ahead. The TradeWinds and the Florida Restaurant and Lodging Association, whose members are suffering so much in the aftermath of this ongoing crisis. What a generous opportunity the TradeWinds Resort has provided for all of us who are here this evening. And it is their wish that you will take your certificate to spend a night at the TradeWinds, invite your friends and your family, take lots of pictures and eat in their restaurants to show the world, really, that the beaches here in Florida are vibrant and beautiful and safe and just as wonderful as they always have been. We'd also like to thank the area local chambers of commerce, Clearwater, Largo, and Seminole, for sponsoring this event as well. I couldn't let the evening go by without extending a very special thank you to Dr. Oliver and Dr. Law for the use of this magnificent facility. And a special thanks for my legislative staff and Senator Jones' legislative staff for helping us this evening, and everyone at the college who worked so diligently to help this be a successful launch for our new Policy Institute at St. Petersburg College. As you are probably all aware, on Monday, Senator Jones and I see that Representative Frisch is in the audience. Thank you for being here, Jim, and Senator Justice and other members of our delegation, as well as the rest of the legislature, will be traveling to Tallahassee for a special session to deal with the issue of drilling for oil in the Gulf. There are a lot of people, I've received a lot of emails, there's a lot of questions on both sides of this issue about the fact that it's already against the law, we don't really need this, it's costing a lot of money, da-da-da-da-da-da. The only subject in the governor's call is a resolution, and I'd like to just tell you what it says specifically. The passage of a joint resolution to revise the Florida Constitution to prohibit the exploration for, the drilling for, the extraction of, and the production of oil beneath all Florida waters located between the high mean water line along the coastline of Florida and the seaward limit of Florida's boundaries. That's what we are going there to talk about and discuss. Now, we're all waiting to see whether or not the President of the Senate and the Speaker of the House will decide to add other things into that call. There were a lot of questions that we received this evening that we weren't able to answer. But one of the ones that I think is really critical for me to share with you is, how do you, the citizens in our state, make your voices heard? How do you influence the Florida legislature to do the right thing? And the answer to that is stay tuned, stay connected, email, write, and phone call. When the House passed that bill a year ago to be able to drill in Florida waters, the rationale that they used was 60% of the people in the state of Florida are okay with it. Well, I don't think that's true today, and I hope you'll let all the members of the legislature know how you feel about it. I urge you to stay tuned on this very important issue. Please don't forget the dates of our next two series, August 18th and October 2nd. We really look forward to seeing all of you back here again. Tell all your friends, and please, thank you so much for being engaged with us this evening. Thank you.